You're welcome back. This is Newsfile. It's your most authoritative news analysis platform. Is brought to you by the candid sponsorship of Bank of Africa, as strong as a group and close as a partner, MTN everywhere you go. Ashesi University, educating ethical and entrepreneurial leaders for Africa. Robert & Sons Optical Services, your comprehensive eye care service provider for 31 years. Duraplus, how you get your water matters. Remember, where Duraplus goes, water flows. DBS Industries, roofing, Papa Fie. My Way, dial *165# on MTN to join My Way today. Cherry Tree Properties, we develop spaces as though we were going to occupy them ourselves. Syntex Tanks, it's strong and it's tough. Flamingo Paints, simply superior. There's a couple of your messages here, and Opoku Asamoah says that coup is not good, but our leaders continually justify this act. How on earth will the government of Ghana owe vendors of SFP but receive their fat monthly salaries? For ECOWAS, the least said is better. Someone's election is contested in the court and he is elected as what? K. Amwa says, if all efforts of the teaming experts in Africa are focused on developing economies and its people, I do not doubt Africa will be the best place to live. Dr. Park Clement says, why is ECOWAS considering a military intervention to restore democracy in Niger when 3 other nations in the sub-region where democracies were overthrown did not attract the same reaction from ECOWAS? Where are the principles? Honestly, I think such a move will be counterproductive with dire consequences for the sub-region. Kweku Nchubuesiaku says, I think anybody who supports a coup d'etat does so because they believe they have nothing to gain from the prevailing democracy in their country. Whoever is confident that there could not be coup in their country must therefore do a research as to how many people in their country believe they have anything to gain from the prevailing democracy. Those who stage coup d'etat would often gauge the mood of the people, whether or not majority will support takeover of power. Musa Abator says, I'm not in any way in support of coup d'etat, but the unprecedented coups we are seeing today is a result of corruption and mismanagement. For instance, what's happening under Akufo-Addo and Bawumia government, where public office holders are keeping their foreign money in their bedrooms, appear no different from what is happening in Niger. Please, they keep it in a box. That is also a place to save, isn't it? They keep it in a box. People buy all sort of jokes here in this country. Now, this one says, let the people decide what kind of leadership they want. If ECOWAS is interested, so-called democracy over the welfare of the people, ECOWAS has lost its legitimacy. Alhaji Suleiman shared that one, and that will be my final message. Or I should just read this. African leaders are a disgrace to humanity and puppets of descendants of our colonial masters, whom our forebears chased out of Africa. Right, now, let's go check if we have managed to, as it were, turn the corner as far as the economy is concerned, as trumpeted by Ken Ofori-Atta, the finance minister, and opposed by the minority in Parliament. Let's go to Parliament to listen to this and return to the studio, to my guests.
Mr. Speaker, total oil production from all the producing assets within Ghana was approximately 18.5 million barrels from January to May 2023. This translates to an average production of 122,000 barrels per day. Total gas exports to the gas processing plant at Atuabo and the onshore receiving facility. Mr. Speaker, the cash waterfall mechanism and the natural gas clearing have been used to equitably distribute revenues in the sector. Under the updated ESRP, the cash waterfall mechanism is being reformed to ensure mandatory compliance to provide cash flow predictability to key players, IPPs and state energy entities within the energy sector. To address the impact of excess capacity payments on the economy, government has sustained collaborative engagement of IPPs. Currently, IPPs are being engaged to restructure their accrued outstanding balances and eliminate payment shortfalls and arrears accrual in the sector. The gas sales agreement between VRA and NGAS has been renegotiated to reduce the take-or-pay commitment and other financial obligations to the state. Key revisions to the macro-fiscal target for 2023 year include: 1. Overall real GDP growth rate of 1.5% down from 2.8%. Non-oil revenue GDP growth rate of 1.5% down from 3%. End period headline inflation of 31.3% from 18.9%. Primary balance on commitment basis of a deficit of 0.5% of GDP compared to a surplus of 0.7% of GDP, aligning with IMF-supported primary balances. Gross international reserves sufficient to cover at least 0.8 months of imports of goods and service by 2023. Mr. Speaker, revisions to GDP projections. The overall real GDP growth for 2023 has been revised to 1.5% from 2.8%, and non-oil real GDP growth has also been revised to 1.5% from 3%. The downward revision in projected growth for 2023 is an indication of a broad slowdown in the three sectors of the economy as a result of factors such as the fiscal consolidation plan and difficult global conditions. Mr. Speaker, overall GDP growth is, however, projected to rebound to 2.8%, 4.7%, and 4.9% in 2024, 25, and 26, respectively. With the economy showing signs of stabilization, government intends to pursue a growth agenda that is fully aligned with the 2028 timeline for returning to a path of sustainability. Mr. Speaker, given the limited fiscal space, as well as our determination not to accumulate new arrears, our growth agenda will be mainly financed from domestic and external private sector investments, as well as the rationalization of ongoing programs. The approach is to prioritize existing programs that are critical for growth and can be implemented to deliver quick results without huge demands on the available budgetary resources. Ultimately, we will aggressively encourage the private sector under the Ghana Mutual Prosperity Dialogue framework to promote shared growth anchored on job creation, food security, exports, and import substitution. Towards this objective, government expects to finalize a growth strategy in August 2023, an enhanced growth strategy that is. Mr. Speaker, the key elements of the enhanced growth strategy include accelerating scaling up and aggregation in agriculture and value addition for key staples such as rice, poultry, maize, soya, and tomatoes, supporting industrial parks and economic zones that promote innovation and positive spillovers and efficiency for key sectors such as the automotive, pharmaceutical, technology, textiles, and garment industry, promoting tourism to attract international and domestic tourists to boost incomes and create jobs, deepening the digitalization of public service to promote efficiency in service delivery, and protecting the public purse, expanding housing delivery programs to improve access to jobs and accommodation, and deepening financial intermediation programs to enhance inclusion and entrepreneurship.
Ghanaian women had agitated strongly that this media review should address a very important matter, a matter that borders on human rights. And Mr. Speaker, I recall that you also spoke emphatically, which was well received by the Ghanaian people, that a media review should abolish taxes on sanitary pads. It is an embarrassment that such a gross human rights issue.
If you compare the price from the foreign sanitary pad, as I speak, it's 15 Ghana cedis per one. The local companies are preparing or producing this particular sanitary pad at the cost of 11 cedis. And I want to ask Honorable Abropa, should we actually collapse the local industries in this country?
This government owes road contractors about 15 billion Ghana cedis. That is an example of collapsing businesses. That is lack of jobs, because these contractors, Mr. Speaker, 70% of the contractors are not on site. So which project at all is going on as we are talking about? We are in a terrible state.
What the minister is telling us is that he should be applauded for increasing the feeding grant in terms of the nominal value from 97 pesos to 99 pesos. Mr. Speaker, the same finance minister indicated to us that inflation is at 54.1%. Mr. Speaker, let's be realistic. The students are here. Who in this country today can afford to produce what the Ministry for Gender, Children and Social Protection describes as a hot, nutritious meal per day?
You're welcome back. So we were in Parliament, and my guest, Isaac Adongo, MP, Bolga Central, and member Finance, Trade and Industry, Tourism Committees of Parliament, John Ampontia Kuma is MP, Jusso, and Deputy Minister for Finance. Theo Champong is Political Risk Analyst. I'll begin with Isaac Adongo, who is right here in the studio. The NDC did not even wait after the budget was the media review process, did not even wait for a minute to begin to criticize this as, you know, a government that is not learning from how it has destroyed the economy. Why so?
Good morning to you and to your listeners, particularly my people in Bolgatanga Central. Good morning to Dr. Kuma, my good friend. Samson, is a very difficult situation. The finance minister had a very bitter pill to push down the throat of this country. And he needed to find a sweetener to make it easy for us to swallow it. So the language and everything was quite clear that we were being told that this was an economy that he was paying tribute that was dead. At the end of the day, it is not easy to pay tribute of somebody who dies but didn't live a good life. So it was very difficult. So at the end of the day, it was quite clear that this was a difficult funeral dirge that the minister was singing. And I'll give you a very simple analogy. If you have an economy where it had grown by 4.2% by June, of course you expect that that economy will continue that trajectory. Then they tell you that the economy is now going to take a downward trend and will end the year at 1.5%. It's akin to going to Kumasi, and you are very quick to get to Nkoko. But from Nkoko, you are actually reversing to come back to Bunso to restart the journey. Who does that? How can you move from 4.2% to 1.5%? Samson, if you have a taxi driver who earns annually, say, 400,000, and he does 200,000 half year, and another 200,000 half year, the two gives him 400,000. What the minister said is that by June, that taxi driver had increased the revenue he got last year of 200,000 by 4.2%, which is about 840 Ghana cedis. But his total income at the end of the year will be 1.5% of the two put together, which is the 400,000 by 1.5. His total income at the end of the year will be 600. What it means is that from that point, he must make losses of 240, so he will end the year at 600. Meanwhile, he earned 840 already. You expect this person who has been told that the 840 that has come to you is not for you, and that you are going to make losses, you are going to take your car out. Most of the time, you will come home and you don't even have the fuel you sent out there. And you have to go and borrow to buy fuel the next time. And you return without the money that you used to buy the fuel. That is what is going to happen to you from now till the end of the year, so that you now will earn 600 and not 840 you earned at the beginning, at the middle of the year. If this is not a funeral dirge, you are singing to this person. What are you singing to that person?
Did he not speak to facts when he said, quote, the economy is showing signs of recovery. The exchange rate has stabilized. Inflation has softened. And interest rates have declined since December 2022.
So why was he not quoting the figures? You see, this is a clever, what is softened? What is moderated? Quote the figures and we will understand.
So in December,
inflation was 41% in May. It increased to 42% in June. That should tell you that inflation is on an upstick. And nobody celebrates 42.5% of inflation.
But it was 54.1 at the peak in December 2022.
Why? He wanted it.
So he's saying it has declined, and that is a fact.
No, I'm saying that if you had 54%, and you think that it should remain there, then you are not a manager of the economy. Let me tell you why inflation will remain elevated. I'm giving you these numbers from his own budget. Year-on-year growth. Currency outside the banking sector, the monies that they pumped into the economy, are not in the banks. People are withdrawing the money and putting it in their rooms, in their boxes, and under their beds. That alone grew by 44.8% in 2022, just 1 year. Half year, June of this year, it has grown by 41.3%. It means that in 1.5 years, over 86% of the money in the banking sector have left the banks. This will put further pressure on inflation. That's why inflation is on an upstick. You have to look at the fundamentals that are driving the numbers. If you were giving me downward growth in these numbers, then I'm seeing that your inflation will be anchored and that you are beginning to solve the problem. But the problem still persists and it's been getting worse. Look, total liquidity in the economy, 2022, grew by 38%. And by half year, it has grown even more than the total year by 44.4%. How can you solve inflation with these type of numbers, liquidity numbers? Look, currency in circulation, 2022, it grew by 42.8%. And as at half year, it has grown by 38.8%. Reserve money, 2022, increased by 57.5%. And by half year, it has grown by 29.24%. These are the numbers that are driving inflation. So if you see these numbers and you are not scared, look, if you get 57.5% increase in your reserve money, what it means is that this must be multiplied by a factor of 3 to get the money supply in the economy. In other words, your amount of money in circulation grew by almost, your money supply increased by almost 160% in 1 year. And you need to bring those monies back in order to solve the problem of inflation. You took a chunk of that money. You said they should write it off. So how will the money come back? You took a chunk of that, 80 billion, you took it. So for those monies to come back in order to effect these numbers to moderate and slow down inflation, you must pay the 80 billion so they lock that money out and that money is not back in the economy. You say you can't pay, they should write it off.
He said interest rates have declined.
That's
also a
Samson,
fact,
that
isn't
is
it?
not a fact. Last year, just a few days ago, were you not in this country when the governor increased the policy rate to 30%? Is that how interest rates come down? Government itself is borrowing at almost 30% on 91-day bills. And this report is saying that the interest rate that is charged customers has increased to 35% in its own report. So how can you see the numbers and say something different? Are we not in this country when they increase the policy rate? And you know the rate at which even the government and the Bank of Ghana itself, this 35% that they are talking about is what we call the Ghana reference rates. You know, we used to have base rates. So Bank of Ghana abolished it and said it will do a Ghana reference rate so that all banks apply it.
If you are using the 91-day, bill,
Yeah.
in December, it was 36.23.
Yes.
As we speak, around at June, it was 30. No, that's rather if you're using the 182-day bill. Right. So it was 35.48 in December. And in June, it was 21.77. That sustains, as a matter of fact, what he said.
No. You see, even the Bank of Ghana lends at 30%. Okay? The Bank of Ghana itself lends at 30%. So, how can you be playing gymnastics? And that is the key indicative interest rates for the economy to respond to. So, if the Bank of Ghana is charging 30% only a few days ago, all your other numbers are irrelevant. The man who is driving the interest rate, the Bank of Ghana has responsibility for price development, interest rate, inflation, and depreciation of the currency. That man has come to say he will charge 30%. All other numbers don't make sense. So how can you now look us in the face and say look, you said that by the end of the year, the total reserve at the Bank of Ghana can only cover 0.8 months. 0.8 months means less than 1 month. Now that money assumes that the IMF will give us 1.2 billion and we will not use that money. If we keep that money that the IMF is going to give us and we'll get the World Bank to give us 540 million, the two together will give us about 1.74 billion. And the IMF is saying, don't throw this money into the economy. Keep it. And they are saying that if they keep that money will cover 0.8 months. In other words, you don't even have reserves. And so how can you say that less than 1 month of import cover is what turns the corner of the economy?
To say we have turned the corner as far as the economy is concerned is to say that we have passed the critical point and we are starting to improve. If you look at the facts, that supports it, that we have been at a critical point. Of course, as you get up this morning and you want, kenke that may satisfy you, maybe the 5 cedis ball of kenke, unprecedented, will not be enough for you. But he's saying that it could have been worse. This is what he has managed to do. And now, because of the softening decline, we are beginning to improve.
And I'm saying it's not declining. You see,
but the figures say otherwise.
Your city has depreciated by 20, almost 30% half year. You should be worried. Half year.
Yeah.
And the only source of forex we are going to get is from the IMF 1.2, the World Bank 540 million. Even that put together will not even cover 1 month of imports. You should be very worried. But you see, if you come to Parliament and you revise all the targets that will help us to get out of the woods in a negative direction, your targets that would have helped us to improve the economy, You have come to say that all of them are completely out of gear. So how are you going to turn the corner if you at the beginning of the year assess the level at which you will turn the corner? And now you have come back to tell us that I can't meet any of them.
All right, let me ask Dr. Theo Champon that question. So, Doc, I have read from other experts, Joe Jackson and the rest of them. They say, look, reality check. Overall GDP, we, in the 2023 budget, 2.8%. The current reality is 4.2%. And the revised budget is 1.5. Inflation target was 18.9%. The reality is 42.5% as of June 2023. The revision is 31.3%. When you talk about gross international reserves, the 2023 budget, not less than 3.3 months cover. Reality check, 2.5 months cover. The revision, at least 0.8 months cover. Primary balance, commitment basis. In the 2023 budget, 0.7% surplus. Now we have 0.5% surplus, expenditure allocation and the rest of them. So everywhere, at every front, reality is pushing us to reduce what we had budgeted. How do you juxtapose that with the statement that has gained currency, turning the corner? This is what would have led you to get to a certain improved status. But what would have led you to get to a certain improved status, you are rather now reducing that. Yes, Dr. Theo Champon.
Good morning. It's very easy to answer that question. In my considered view, we're still in the corner. We haven't fully turned yet. And I'll explain that with some of the indicators, right? We cannot deny that there has been some positive signs of recovery, quote and unquote. And it's quite important we understand that. But the frame of reference in terms of some of these relative positive signs is just what's happened in the last couple of weeks and months. But that does not in any way indicate whatsoever that we have fully turned the corner as yet. In other words, when you look at some of the indicators that the government set for itself in the 2023 budget, which was read in November of last year, and you compare that to what the projections are for this year, clearly you see that there are issues. Because if we had turned the corner, the question then would have been, why are we then revising all these macroeconomic numbers and indicators down from what we said we'll be doing ourselves? So let's start with the positives, and then we'll address with the other substantive issues. Yes, if you look at GDP growth on the quarterly basis, the number that we have for the first quarter of the year is up 4.2% versus 3% of last quarter. If you look at the reserves, which is one of the big issues with CD and the depreciation, the net international reserves was 0.6 months, basically 2 weeks of import cover as of December last year. That's how dire the situation was. And it's been reported now that it's now gone up to 1.1 months of import cover. So
that's 3 weeks, right?
No, that's 1.1 months. So that's 1 month and a couple of days on top of that. So we've been able to add some buffer, more or less, to that. If you look at the primary balance, so the primary balance is your revenue and expenditure, but you don't include your interest payments in that. If you look at that, the report shows that we have a surplus of 1.1% of GDP versus an original target of 0.04%. And there's public debt and all of that. So these are positive indicators. We acknowledge that. But you have to do a holistic analysis using the entire budget number of 2023 as the frame of reference. And if you use that as a frame of reference, it is difficult to sustain then the argument that we have turned the corner. Because the indicators show very clearly that we have made major adjustments and cuts to a lot of these numbers. Take inflation, for argument's sake. In the original policy target, inflation should be between 6 and 10%. Inflation now is in excess of 42%, right? And it's sticky. It's not coming down anytime soon. So you cannot then, on the basis of that, say, because the inflation is 40 or so percent and it's been relatively stable around that mark, we have turned the corner. That argument doesn't wash. Take the exchange rate, CD, again, right? The CD has been trading around 11 or so for some time now. However, if you do the depreciation and you work out the number, right, from the beginning of the year, it is very clear. You're talking almost 22, 23% depreciation year to date. So again, it's difficult to sustain that argument of having turned the corner. The indicators are positive, but we are still largely in the corner and we have not turned in that regard. Lastly, if you look at the budget itself, the media budget that the government presented, and you look at the numbers that the government is highlighting in the media budget and what they intend to do, I find it a bit difficult to even accept some of the cuts that are being proposed. Because again, my frame of reference is 2022 in the budget. In the 2022 budget, if you look at there's a table in the media budget, table 6. If you look at the adjustments that the government said in the media, or in the original budget, the government said that they were going to be doing a revenue of 100.5 billion Ghana cedis. So this is the budget that was read in November of 2021.
All right.
And they were going to be doing an expenditure of 135.6, so roughly 136 billion Ghana cedis. Right? And that then means that you had a balance or a deficit of 35 billion that had to be financed. In mid-year, they came to Parliament. So this is Russia-Ukraine happens, June, come to Parliament and say that, well, we're going to be doing now a revenue of about 97 billion and an expenditure of 134 billion, right? And that reflected a cut, particularly on the expenditure side, of going down from 27 or so percent of GDP to about 23% of GDP. This is all in the numbers that the government presented.
Right.
Table 3, Table 5, Table 6 of the mid-year budget. Now see what happens. So we get to the end of the year, and the revenue is still within the ballpark. It's about 96 billion, the provisional item. But watch the expenditure. The expenditure now jumps from 138 to 165 billion. And if you look at how that is going to be financed from the budget line items, the original budget that was presented in 2022, in 2021 for 2022, there was not going to be any financing of the deficit from Bank of Ghana. It was zero. A lot of the deficit financing was going to come from the commercial banks and other non-banks. There was about 27 billion of deficit financing. Now watch what happens. At the end of the year in 2022, the financing now jumps from 37 billion now to 65 billion. And out of this 65 billion, 55 billion of that is financed domestically. And within this 55 billion that is financed domestically, the Bank of Ghana pushes as much as 53 billion Ghana cedis into the economy and to support the government's fiscal objectives, even against the ceilings that the Bank of Ghana Act, Act 612, as amended by, 918. And all of this money and the excess deficit spending basically ends up going to drive a large part of the inflation that we see in the latter part of the year. So when now the argument is made that, we have turned the corner, the evidence doesn't really support that case, because your frame of reference ought to be what you indicated and said in the budget, the 2022 budget, not what we are seeing in terms of the relative stability that we're seeing here. And I'm sure we'll come to the whole Bank of Ghana argument and all of that.
Right.
But it is very clear, at least on the surface, when you look at the data and the numbers, that we are not out of the woods yet.
All right. Dr. Kumar, so, okay. So you see, the figures as have been thrown out there in the manner they have been, and the like Isaac says, the minister introduces with a sweetener so that people don't exactly feel that this is how harsh the situation is. But people feel it. Like Kufuor introduced the term, it's actually in your pocket. That's how people feel it. They ask themselves, they don't have to ask really, what is the worth of my Ghana cedi? Today, if I need to make purchases, how much of it is worth what? And to think that they are dealing with a proud Ghana whose currency is now only like compared to places like, is it Zimbabwe, about two very terribly performing countries. So the claim that we have turned the corner, it is expected that people would have taken this and make a meal of it, right?
Well, thank you, Samson. And good morning to your viewers and listeners, and good morning to Dr. Theo, and a special good morning to Honorable Adongo, my good friend. Tell him that I send him greetings from Harry Maguire, his good friend.
Great.
Because today he is playing the self-scoring goals. From his argument, today he's playing the Harry Maguire role. He must always remember that nobody sings a funeral dirge in a white cloth. This is just for laughter purposes.
I see. John, say Adongo.
I should say what?
Adongo.
Adongo.
Yes. So it's Adongo. It's not Adongo.
Honorable Adongo.
Correct. All right. So let's go.
Okay. Great. So back to the issues. Let me start with the meaning of turning the corner and how it's been interpreted. Clearly, the Minister for Finance spoke with all humility, and he understands the difficult current global and domestic financial situation we find ourselves. So our choice of the phrase turning the corner is not in any way or should not in any way be interpreted to say that we are totally out of the woods or we have seen full recovery. But as you can understand from the metaphor, when you are driving and you turn the corner, it means you see your way clearer. It means that your path is rather now straight to a better destination. So let us not misinterpret that phrase when we say we have turned the corner. But clearly, all the statistics that the finance minister provided indicate that indeed it is better compared to 6 months ago. It doesn't mean we are okay now, but we see our way better now. A lot of doubts in the air have been removed, especially those who hang their hopes on getting a fund program within the shortest possible time to anchor our fiscal consolidation program, and all that has been achieved. So it is part of turning the corner, the debt restructuring.
So how do you say you see your way clear now when you have reduced, when you have reduced the figures that gave you the hope?
Exactly, that's what I'm coming to. So let me deal with the growth strategy, which has been revised in line with the IMF fiscal consolidation plan. I mean, clearly, even though we have achieved 4.2% in the first quarter, we have been, we have still revised our growth target to 1.5 from 2.8%. But this is in line with the contractionary fiscal policy that we are required to do under the fund program. And so to counter that, government has also announced in the media budget a certain growth strategy that will still ensure that we are able to achieve higher growth outside the fiscal arrangement. And we're going to do that through the private sector and, of course, some support we are expecting from the development partners. And he clearly outlined how we are going to achieve that higher growth. So I don't think that there should be any cause for alarm. Clearly, when the figures indicate that even though we are targeting low, the reality is that we are doing more. So there should be no cause for.
How do you respond to critics who say that there had always been the issue of data credibility, with the Bank of Ghana, because it now looks like after having signed on to the IMF, we have received information that gives you the accurate situation, so that according to the 2023 International Monetary Fund Regional Economic Outlook Report, Sub-Saharan Africa, Ghana's net international reserves are expected to end 2023 at approximately 3 weeks of import cover. That is 0.8 months. This contrasted with the Bank of Ghana's Summary of Economic and Financial Data, which estimated Ghana's reserves for 2023 at 2.7 months of import cover. So now you have seen the clear picture and you are giving the correct figures. Is that not so?
Well, but you see, even from the figures you just read, one is net, one is gross. So depending on what figure you are speaking to, you may have questions of why different numbers and different interpretation. So let's be clear on that. Ghana has always been, or let me say the finance ministry has always been honest with our figures. I mean, remember that we are under the fund program. If you churn out figures that are not correct, the country can be punished.
Yes, and we have suffered that before, yeah.
Yeah, we have suffered that, especially under my good friend's government, on Abu Adongo's government. So definitely we are not churning out any figures that are contrary to what it is. But I just want to go straight to the indicators that as we have now, which indeed point to the fact that we have turned the corner. And one of the key things that, let me speak to the ordinary Ghanaian to appreciate when we say that we have turned the corner. In just December, fuel cost was about 24 Ghana cedis. Today, as we speak, it's dropped to about 12. This is not to say 12 cedis is okay. But like I said, turning the corner doesn't mean end of the game. We know that things are in the right path and we are hoping to make it better as we move on. Also, the exchange rate. We know that it got to a time that it shot to about 15 Ghana cedis in November, December. And today, as we speak, we are hovering around 10 point something to 11 Ghana cedis, which at least we have seen a certain level of stability on the exchange rate front as well. And then also on the inflation, clearly we were at 54, we've tapered down to 42.5. Of course, we know that Parliament recently passed some new revenue measures in the budget, which also got reflected somewhere from May. And so some of the impact from the new measures from the taxes are also having effect on the inflation levels that we are seeing. But put all together, you realize that indeed we are in a better position right now compared to where we were. And we are very hopeful that going forward, before the end of the year, we are indeed going to see a number of positive changes that will reflect in the objectives of government as far as fiscal consolidation is concerned our debt restructuring is concerned. Even on so if you look at the expenditures, the finance minister announced that even though we had a target to do 227.8 billion in the appropriation, by the mid-year we have reviewed downwards to do about 206 billion, and then even posting a positive primary balance of 1.2%. So all these are indicators that we are heading towards the right direction, and we are not saying that is the end. I mean, we have fully recovered and that everybody should go to sleep. No, turning the corner doesn't mean that way. It just means that we see our way clearer. We are very optimistic. We have confidence in the measures that we have outlined so far, and we are very confident that by the end of the year, Ghanaians are going to have a better story to tell about the economy, and that we should continue to put trust in the government and have confidence that the measures we are putting in place will help us recover better and faster as is expected.
Okay. Now, Isaac, the question I get asked is that, for example, when you take the Bank of Ghana situation into it, the question is, from the picture that the finance minister paints, is it actually possible to grow at what we have revised at? Because the central bank is literally broke. Bankrupt.
Yes. So, Samson, first I want to make this correction. You don't compare end-year figures to mid-year figures. Nobody does that. Because in mid-year, the influences are different from end-year. Your inflation of 54% last year includes the total envelope of financing you did for 1 year. You cannot compare that to financing you've done for 6 months. When you have come back, initially, your budget, you estimated that you were going to do 64 billion concessionary financing. Now you've erased that completely. You now say you are going to do domestic 44 billion, which was not in the original estimate. It has different implications. So they should stop comparing June to December. December, we will see the full size of the fraud. And you are telling us that now that you say your way is clear, this is how the year will end. And it doesn't look good. So nobody does that in finance. Look, in June, inflationary figures and numbers are driven by different dynamics. In December, the driver of inflation is most often imports for Christmas. Have you arrived there? So stop comparing. What you compare is your target to your reality. And not a full year's dynamics compared to some half-year dynamics. That is one. 2, you haven't paid a penny of interest in debt service for this year. So how can you be comparing your primary balance and your debt service to a period where we paid our debt service? A period where you have told the whole world that you cannot pay and you are busy begging them to forgive you. You are comparing that to a period where you paid. Your overall deficit will be different. Your primary balance is influenced largely by how much you have paid or you borrowed to pay for your interest and your debt service. So once you are not paying debt service, you will not have borrowed money to pay that service.
But you are also not going to be called upon to pay the debt now. So at least
we don't know yet. But I'm saying that
you have a breathing space.
But we are saying that there are 2 different statistics.
I appreciate that.
Good. So you should avoid these semantics. Try and put through just 30% of your debt service and let's see where you will be.
So from where you sit, how do we turn the corner and bring the Bank of Ghana into the picture?
Samson, we haven't even seen the tail light of the corner. That corner is far away. It's like you are here and the corner is in Boga. How can you see it? These people are just trying to use semantics so that they paint over the reality. You see, the 0.8 months is not their figure. It is an IMF figure. And I've told you the components of that 0.8. It is $1.2 billion from the IMF. We've gotten $600 million of it, which has influenced the 1.1 you put there. The other period didn't take that 600 million. You are looking for another 600 million by your first review, hoping that there will be approval in November so that you can get that figure in. And yet in your budget, your concessionary borrowing that included this figure, you have eliminated it, which means you are not even too sure. And then 3, you are hoping that the World Bank will give you 540 million. If you put that together, that is 1.74 billion. That is the figure given to you as a target per your program. You have no way of changing that figure. You must meet it. Unless you can go and demonstrate to the IMF that, look, with what we are doing, we will exceed it. Then the revision can be made, if you can prove it. So you have an economy at half year being compared to full year. For instance, if you take debt to GDP, you have an estimate of the whole year's GDP, okay? And then you put the public debt at this point in time on that whole year's GDP you have even earned. Obviously, the GDP will be bigger. Your debt will be smaller because you have incurred the other debt that you incur to complete and deliver that GDP. So you will see a smaller debt to GDP. If you pick that and say, oh, June, I got 71, and last year I was around 100%. Who are you deceiving? You are basically putting a smaller debt, which does not reflect the total debt that you incur at the end of the year, over a projected bigger GDP. Certainly, the numbers will artificially show an improvement. You don't carry that one to Parliament to go and say that you have turned a corner that is still in Boga and you are sitting here. You can't even see the tail light of that corner. If you attempt to turn it now, that will be a fatal accident.
For someone like you who has been raising issues about the Bank of Ghana and the issues of our finances with them, what do you say about the current situation? And in my introduction, I said I didn't understand something. I wish that you guys can help me understand. That you say about, is it 90% of what is called the loss by the Bank of Ghana is attributable to the DDEP. And I'm saying, from where I sit, the DDEP, I was the one affected because I had my money with you. And you decided that I take a haircut. How does that translate to you making a loss?
So what I want to say is that there are laws that govern public finances. And the Bank of Ghana, its own law, under Section 31, says that, look, you have the mandate to lend to government, whether in the form of advances, treasury bills, overdraft, whatever instruments. Then 36 says that all the loans under 31 should not exceed 5% of the previous year's revenue. So that's your limit. Like my colleague said, your total revenue for last year was 96 billion. How can you now be giving 80 billion to government? And he says at any point, this is at the end of the year, at any point should not be more than 5%. Now this is the Public Financial Management Act. And I want us to take our time and look at some provisions in it. The Public Financial Management Act is an act that was put together to govern the management of public finances and to be a guide to the audit of public finances. And it is supposed to be applied by all covered entities. And this is how the law defines covered entities, so that people understand why I'm saying Bank of Ghana is perpetuating illegality. Under the interpretations, 102, a covered entity has been defined. A covered entity has been defined to mean the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary. B, constitutional bodies, and Bank of Ghana is a constitutional body. Ministry, department, agencies, and local government authorities. The public service. Autonomous agencies, and Bank of Ghana is an autonomous constitutional body. And the judiciary. What it means is that if you are any of these, you must apply this law. And there's a provision in this law that says that anytime there's a conflict between this law and any other law, this law prevails.
Okay.
What it then means is that the Bank of Ghana Act becomes irrelevant to the provisions of this act. And even the Bank of Ghana Act does not provide any exceptions that they had. Under Section 53 of this, the law is very, very clear. And it says, 53 is talking about abandonment of claims and write-off of public funds. What are the rules? 51A, says the minister shall seek the approval of Parliament in A, abandon or remit a claim by or on behalf of the government, abandon or remit a service to the government, and write-off of loss of or as of a deficiency in public funds or public resources. Where Parliament grants approval under subsection 1, the A and B I've just read. Under subsection 1, the approval shall be by a resolution of a simple majority of Parliament. But it provides a proviso. And that proviso is that the minister may, in accordance with the regulations, abandon or remit. That means the minister can come under a regulation. And that regulation is saying that he can remit a claim or write it off, but he must report to Parliament every year by the third month. In the regulations governing this act, there is no threshold, which means that any such write-off must come to Parliament. You see, if we did not do this,
has not come to Parliament.
Nothing. So the so-called write-off of 32 billion is an imagination. The law under 97 provides for surcharge. Look, is there the opinion of the chief legal officer of government on this matter? 32 billion. You can't just go away and write off 32 billion Ghana cedis. The Attorney General must tell us his opinion.
So what should happen if, as you say, and the minority has been insistent on this, that the law has been breached?
Yes.
What should happen?
So, there are certain things I don't want to say. Sometimes your powers are stronger when the person is naked. At this moment in time, we know what will happen if you go to court. So when everybody is left alone, the president is sitting somewhere, Attorney General is sitting somewhere, Ken Ofori-Atta is sitting somewhere, and Addison is sitting somewhere, we can now isolate and arrest. At this point, they are together fighting you. So we are very careful to choose our battles. But we just want to serve warning that they must produce the Attorney General's opinion that said that this law does not apply to Bank of Ghana, even though Bank of Ghana is a covered entity. But you see, the other issues beyond this technical argument is the fact that there's a reason why we say don't lend recklessly to the Bank of Ghana, to the government of Ghana, because it creates what we call fiscal dominance over monetary policy. What it simply means is that it creates a situation where monetary policy like the Bank of Ghana cannot take optimal decisions. It pumps a lot of money into the economy, like I listed those liquidity issues, and makes it difficult to anchor inflation.
Okay. Yes, Dr. Theo Champong, well, you wanted us to get here first. So what's your take on this matter of the BOG recording a 60.8 billion loss in 2022? And my question that I asked, I need some explaining. Help me appreciate it.
Yeah, so the two issues are interlinked. Let me pick from where Honorable Adongo just left off with the fiscal dominance issue. And it's very important that we understand what has happened within the public finances of this country over the last 2 or so years, right? So originally, like I had highlighted, when that 2023 budget was read in November of 2021, the idea was that you're going to have a 37 billion Ghana financing deficit. And of this 37 billion, the Bank of Ghana was not going to be involved anyway in financing that deficit. The line item there in table 6 of the media budget is zero. It's there. You can see, I think I provided some charts to your colleagues to put on
we
the
have
screen.
seen it. We have seen it.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Then, even as of the mid-year when we came, the amount had moved just a little bit. So there was a 38 billion gap. Out of that 38 billion, 28 billion was coming from domestic sources. Of the 28, 8 billion was going to come from Bank of Ghana, right? Something happens from July to December that forces the bank now to lend even in excess of what the appropriations were during the mid-year budget, thereby, in my view, even breaching the provisions of the Bank of Ghana Act and the Public Financial Management Act, as Honorable Adongo and others have spoken about. So if you look at the number, 55 billion was the financing from domestic sources. And Bank of Ghana pushes or pumps in 53 billion as part of this here, right? So if you work the number out, that's over 90% of that, or as a proportion of your total financing, 85%. So 85 CDs of every 100 CDs that came in to finance the deficit in 2022 came largely from the central bank, because Ghana was locked out of the capital markets. There were the issues even with the domestic market and all of that. But it goes to the point that Honorable Adongo and others have all argued out, right? That there is an overdominance of the fiscal side of things that in a way even pushes or compromises, in my view, the independence of the central bank. Because you look at the central bank and their core mandate is twofold in Axis 1.2. The first one says they've got to fight or address inflation, so price stability. And then the second is something related to supporting general government policy and related matters, right? Where they can give overdrafts and loans and things like that. But in the amended section 1A of Axis 1, it says that except as provided in this constitution, the Bank of Ghana, in the performance of its function under this act, shall not be subject to the direction or control of any person or authority. This is explicitly stated in the act. And you look at the people that sit on the board of the central bank in section 4 of the amendments, right? From the governor, the deputy governors, all the way to the 9 other directors, these are all appointed by the president, right? So you begin to see the conundrum where the central bank is basically being used to finance the deficit and has become the piggy bank of the state, to the point that the original mandate of the central bank, which is to fight inflation, we've lost that battle, right? The policy target, they said, not me, they were going to do between 6 and 10% inflation, right? As we speak now, it's in excess of 40. Even the target now this year is not going, the provision or the forecast is that it will come down to about 30. But inflation is still sticky. So there's a mismatch between the policy making environment. It comes down to the fact that you've got, the state pretty much on the fiscal side of things dominating everything.
All right.
And that has led to a compromise on the central bank's, own ability to meet the core mandates of that.
All right.
And I think there are issues there that we need to, again, for me, legally, we need to interrogate, because Honorable Adongo maybe can speak to this. If you look at Section 30 of the Act, right, again, it says that you cannot borrow or lend more than 5% of the previous year's revenue. But in 36, it says that in the event of an emergency, the governor, the minister, the controller, and accountant general shall meet to decide the limit on the borrowing. That should be made by the government. And number 2, the minister shall submit a report on the issue to Parliament within 7 sitting days. Question is, did this meeting take place? Number 2, was that report ever submitted to Parliament? Same thing in the amendment of the Act. It says section 16.7 says that where the loans, advances, and purchases of treasury bill securities is 5%. So when you have hit that target of the previous year's revenue, the governor shall notify the minister, so that's the Minister of Finance, and Parliament in attainment of the limit under subsection 2, and the minister, upon notification, shall again report to Parliament on the remedial measures that are meant to be taken. This is in the Act. That's it.
And all of this have not been done. Interesting. All of this have not been done. Interesting. Let's go to John. John, how do you react to this? Including what appears to be clear, if you like, breaches of the law with such impunity?
Something. Thank you very much. Let me respond to some of the issues raised by both Honorable Adongo and Dr. Tio. On the issue of Honorable Adongo, he's talking about targets versus reality. And for him, anytime there's a problem between our target and our reality, we should go for reality. And if he takes that position, then he must agree with government that indeed we are turning the corner, and that the reality is that the first quarter growth of 2023 was 4.2%. So on the issues of standards of measurement that he talks about, using end of year GDP to measure the debt levels, this is not new to the way government has done accounting in Ghana. If you take all our previous budget, this has been the formula that has been used and approved by Parliament consistently. So it's not a new thing. He also read the PFM Act and then started to say that the PFM Act, if there's any provision in the PFM Act that is inconsistent with any other law, then the PFM Act will supersede that law or those other laws. And I want to caution him that he cannot take that position because the Bank of Ghana is a constitutional body and its creation is subject to the constitution of the land. So he must know that there are other.
So you are invoking a constitutional provision.
I'm saying that he cannot take that position.
So tell us the specific. The specific authority that you are relying on to vary this provision, which says where there is a conflict or inconsistency between the provisions of this Act and any other relevant enactment, the provisions of this Act shall prevail.
And I'm saying that Article 2 of the 1992 Constitution has also provided that any law that is inconsistent with the provisions of the Constitution is to the extent of inconsistency void. So don't rely only on this.
So you are saying this is inconsistent with the constitutional provisions governing the Bank of Ghana's functions?
Exactly, when he has not examined those laws. So you be careful how
wait, John, you are introducing a new thing that may take us. No, wait, I'm coming. I'll give you the opportunity. But if you say that a provision of the Act is inconsistent with the Constitution, and to the extent of that inconsistency, the law says it will be void, null and void. Remember that it is not your say so. You have to take a writ to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court must declare that this provision should not apply. Until and unless that has happened, this will continue to be the law.
Well, I don't want to go on that tangent. We are lawyers. We have different interpretations.
No, you have breached the law. No, if what you are saying is what you are saying, then you have breached the law with impunity, and you can't claim that by your interpretation.
No, we have not breached the law.
No, you cannot say that. No, John, hold on. I'll give you time. You cannot say that. You cannot say that by your interpretation, this provision is inconsistent with the Constitution.
I didn't speak to my interpretation. I spoke to the general law he spoke.
Okay.
That any law inconsistent with PFM Act, to the extent of inconsistency, will be void. And I said that is not correct in relation to the Constitution. And I've quoted Article 2 of the Constitution to make that point. This is just general.
Yes, and I'm saying that we ought to educate the public correctly. If you are quoting the provision of the Constitution that you have quoted, you cannot do that by your say-so. Not even the Attorney General, not even the Chief Justice can wake up one day and say, the law says I should do X, Y. My reading of that law suggests that it is inconsistent with the Constitution. And to that extent, I cannot apply that law. Unless you have taken a writ to the court and the court has struck down the provision, it is the law and must be complied with. That's the education I was seeking to give.
The Constitution even said that you can write off.
All right.
I don't agree with you on that, but...
you cannot disagree with me on that, John. John, we are both trained as lawyers. No, you cannot disagree with me on that. Sorry?
I totally disagree with you on that.
You totally disagree with me?
I totally disagree with you on that.
That's...
Allow me to explain why I disagree with you. Yes, I disagree with you. So just allow me to explain.
No. You can't disagree with me in a vacuum. That a law has been made by Parliament. You take a view that that provision, there's a provision that is inconsistent with the Constitution, and therefore it should not be enforced without a Supreme Court pronouncement.
But what is even
or Parliament repealing it.
What is even the provision in the Constitution?
Okay, go on with your point.
Without coming to Parliament.
Go on with your point. I think I have given the public that education, that not even the President of the Republic can get up one day and say a law made by Parliament instructs him to do one thing. He disagrees with that law because that law, as far as he is concerned, is inconsistent with the Constitution, and therefore he will not comply with that law. The President does not have that power. He must go to the Supreme Court and tell the Supreme Court that he disagrees with that law because he thinks it is inconsistent with the Constitution. And he must wait for the Supreme Court to say, we agree with you. Until that is done, the President is bound by that law. Until Parliament has repealed that law or the court has struck it down, it remains the laws of Ghana. That's all the education I sought to give. So, John, please go ahead and make your point.
But there's no such provision.
It's clearly different from all the things you are saying, because that is not what I sought to imply. I have not said that the President can wake up one day and say that this law is inconsistent with the Constitution and I'm doing what I like. I haven't said that. That is your position. The point I'm seeking to make is that the issue of a loss of 80 billion by the Bank of Ghana is a question of an accounting problem, which has resulted in impairment of several banks in Ghana. It is not only the Bank of Ghana we are talking about. We are talking about other commercial banks which have also suffered a lot of impairment losses on their balance sheets. And so this is a question of accounting, okay? And what has been the precedence? How has commercial losses of banks been treated in the past? This is not a new thing, and it's not only subject to Ghana. Almost all central banks and other banks, commercial banks around the world, suffer impairment of their losses one way or the other. And this is in respect of the domestic debt exchange that took place in Ghana. And how is the accounting procedure done? Is it required for the Bank of Ghana to go to Parliament on an accounting procedure in writing off a debt or a loss on their balance sheet? This is subject to precedence. So let us not change the nature of the problem and set our own questions and say, bring it under PFM to say you have to go to Parliament. If we have to go to Parliament, there are several other laws that allow the finance minister to go to Parliament to even seek to remedy financial transactions. So let us be very careful how we jump to conclusions to say that somebody didn't do the right thing. But on this particular issue, it's a question of accounting and impairment, what do you call it, loss on the balance sheet of not just Bank of Ghana, but several other banks in the country. How are losses or impairment on balance sheets of banks treated in this country? Is it an accounting issue? If it's an accounting issue, what is the precedence on how impairment and losses on balance sheets are treated in our country? This is all that I'm trying to say. I haven't said that if we disagree with any law, we will give our own interpretation and work with that. So let's be very clear on that one. Now, the issue that Dr. Teo has raised about the 2022 mid-year targets and what finally turned out in the end of the year. I mean, let's try and put that discussion in context, because we know that towards the end of the year, first of all, let me state that central bank financing under the new IMF program that we are doing is currently zero. So we don't have the opportunity to even do the 5% of previous year's revenue as stated in the Banking Act. So this year is totally different from last year. But let me try and bring into perspective the discussions on how the scenario that Dr. Tew talks about happened. I mean, we all know that towards the end of the last year, Ghana, because of our downward ratings, didn't have access to capital markets. And so we could not bring in external financing. And much of the support that we were doing
John, I'm losing you. I'm losing John. Okay, I'll take a break at this point. Awal Muhammad said, if the economy has turned the corner, then how come still goods and services are skyrocketing the prices? Today, a bag of beans in a Jura market is almost 1,100 Ghana cedis. The hardship keeps rising. Compari says the economy might not seem the way we want, but let's hope for a better future. Pray for Ghana says, unfortunately, Ghana can't seem to be anywhere near the corner. Government claiming to have turned after a whole central bank has made a staggering loss of 60 billion. Please kindly inform me when those responsible are indicted. Miktat says, what real impact have those minimal improvements on the economic figures on business and livelihood? And Keamofa, anytime politicians are explaining themselves over statements they have made, then they are either lying or trying to throw dust into the eyes of the public. Sound policies do not need multiple explanations. We'll be right back.